What an absolute surprise Kansas football has been this year. Not only do they have one of the best quarterbacks in college football, but they are 4-0, they look very respectable, they have good wins, and the future of the program is looking extremely bright. Right now, Lance Leipold has to be at the top of your list for Coach of the Year, and he is doing things that Kansas football has not done in a long time. Back in 2007, Mark Mangino and quarterback Todd Reesing led Kansas football to unseen heights and helped get the program back on the map. Ever since Mangino left, though, it has been tough sledding. They've gone through coach after coach, have been the laughingstock of Power 5 football, and many said winning could never happen there. But this year, things have gone completely different, as they are 4-0, have an incredible offense, have good wins, and are really exciting. Somehow, though, they are not ranked, and that is an absolute crime. Despite that terrible fact, today's video is going to be very positive, as we're going to talk about the rise of Kansas football. We're going to talk about the dark times, how they got to this point, how this team got so good, and what my expectations are for the future. But before we can get started, nearly 80% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel, and we can do better than that. So quickly be sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like if you want to support the channel, let me know a topic or player I can cover next, and turn on notifications so you never miss when I upload. Now, let's get started with the rise of Kansas football. To start this video, let's go back to 1995. This was the last season of the Glenn Mason era at Kansas, and the Jayhawks were a top 10 team, went 10-2, and won the Aloha Bowl. Coincidentally, that was also the last year of the Big 8 Conference, and ever since the Jayhawks had joined the Big 12, it was tough sledding. In 1997, Terry Allen was hired as the head coach, and he did nothing in his 5 years at Kansas. In his first season, he went 5-6, then they had 3 straight 7-loss seasons, and his finale was a 3-8 record in 2001. Kansas football had once again become the laughingstock of the Big 12, and no coach was going to touch that program because it was basically a death sentence. There was one man for the job though, and his name was Mark Mangino. He had become an up-and-coming offensive coordinator at Oklahoma, and not only was he known for his great play calling, but he was one of the most iconic-looking coaches in the whole sport of football. He would take over the Kansas football program in 2002, and in his first season, the team would go 2-10 with an 0-8 record in the Big 12, showing little to no promise for the future. In year 2, though, he would show major improvement. The team went 6-7 with a 3-5 record in the Big 12, and they would lose in the Tangerine Bowl. This loss would come to NC State, and that was actually the last season of the Tangerine Bowl. In 2004, the team would go back to losing as they would go 4-7, and then in 2005, they would go 7-5. This was the best season since 1995, and they would win the Fort Worth Bowl over Houston. In 2006, the team would go 6-6, but they were not invited to a bowl game despite having the record to qualify for it. At this point, Mark Mangino had stabilized the program, but it seemed like the program's height was 6 or 7 wins. That was until 2007. This is one of the most magical years in college football history, and Kansas is a big reason for that. Todd Reesing was an undersized and under-recruited quarterback, and he would make his first career start in 2007. There was pretty much no expectations for him or Kansas, but they had stars such as Aqib Talib and Desmond Briscoe. Well, how would Kansas do? They would shock the world. They would win their first 4 games over Central Michigan, Southeastern Louisiana, Toledo, and Florida International, and they put up over 50 points in all 4 of those matchups. At this point, they had beaten absolutely no one, but they were 4-0, so people were pretty happy. They get their first real test in Week 5 on the road against number 24 Kansas State. In the Sunflower Showdown, Kansas would show that they are legitimate, as they would win 30-24, not only beating their rival, but beating a ranked team on the road. This would get them to 5-0 and would put them into the AP poll at number 20. They proved they belonged in the polls the next week as they won 58-10 against Baylor and then went on the road and beat Colorado 19-14. After that, they would climb up to number 12, and then they would have a scare against Texas A&M as they'd only win 19-11. At this point, the team was 8-0 and ranked number 8 in the country. Their next game would come against Nebraska, and in front of the largest crowd in years at Kansas, they'd put up 76 points on the Huskers and win 76-39. They had blown Nebraska into their worst loss in school history and would now climb up to number 5. They'd beat both Oklahoma State and Iowa State before they would become the number 2 team in the country. At this point, there was a legitimate chance that Kansas could go to the national championship, but standing in their way was one of the other Cinderella teams of the 2007 season, the Missouri Tigers. Led by Chase Daniel and Jeremy Maclin, Mizzou had a great offense, and despite losing to Oklahoma early on in the season, had bounced back to a 10-1 record. This game was a neutral site game at Arrowhead Stadium and was probably the biggest game in border war history. These two schools are arch rivals, and just imagine how hyped the game was. The winner of the team would become the #1 ranked school in the country and would advance to the Big 12 championship with a chance at a national title. The loser would be in a very tough and sad spot. Mizzou got out to a dominating lead, but Kansas would make a late comeback before Todd Reesing would infamously get sacked in the end zone, garnering the nickname Sod Reesing. Mizzou would advance to the Big 12 championship, and in their chance to go to the title game, they got killed by Oklahoma and missed their chance at glory. Kansas, on the other hand, despite losing the game, would get to go to the Orange Bowl against number 5 Virginia Tech. Pretty much no one gave him a chance in that game, but Mark Mangino and his Jayhawks proved they belonged as they won 24-21. The Jayhawks had a 12-1 season, which was by far the best season in program history. Mark Mangino was coach of the year, and Kansas football gained a good amount of respect. Todd Reesing had passed for 3,486 yards with 33 touchdowns. Unfortunately, this is where Kansas football started to go downhill. In 2008, they did go 8-5, where they won the Insight Bowl, but then in 2009, they went 5-7. Reesing's play went down, Mark Mangino had some allegations against him, and they were back to their old ways. Kansas thought they were too good for Mangino and decided to fire him. Some say that he left a curse on the program, while others say they just went back to normal. They decided to hire Turner Gill in 2010, where the team would go 3-9 in year 1 and 2-10 in year 2. They went a combined 1-16 in Big 12 play, and Gill was fired after 2 years. In 2012, they bring in Charlie Weiss from Notre Dame, and he didn't do much better. He went 1-11 in year 1, 3-9 in year 2, and 3-9 in year 3. This time they won a combined 2-25 in Big 12 play, and he was fired after the 2014 season. In 2015, they'd make a very controversial hire which made no sense. David Beatty had done a good job coaching receivers at Texas A&M, but I don't think anyone in their right mind thought he'd be a good candidate to be a head coach, let alone at a Power 5 school, let alone at Kansas. That is what Kansas would end up doing, as Beatty immediately showed he was in over his head. They went 0-12 in year 1, 2-10 in year 2, and 1-11 in year 3. The lone conference win in 3 years was that awesome overtime upset over Texas. That was the game that got Charlie Strong fired, and after a 3-9 campaign in 2018, David Beatty was fired. The team had gone and combined 2-34 in conference play, had 4 straight 10th place Big 12 finishes, and had gotten nowhere. They had now had 10 straight losing seasons, and Kansas football was in its worst spot ever. After LSU and Les Miles parted ways, the Jayhawks decided they were going to take a flyer and hire him. I mean, Les Miles is one of the few coaches who had a national title to his name. He could recruit, and he had nothing to lose. In year 1, Miles actually did a decent job. The team went 3-9 with a 1-8 mark in the conference, and he signed the best recruiting class in years. He had a couple stars and guys like Puka Williams, Andrew Parchment, and Stephon Robinson, but that would not carry over into 2020. The team would end up going 0-9 with an 0-8 mark in the Big 12, and after allegations surfaced around Miles, he was canned. One of the major bright spots of the 2020 team, though, was Jayden Daniel. He becomes extremely important in the rise of Kansas football, and Miles had found a diamond in the rough. At this point, Kansas had now gone through 11 straight seasons of losing, had 2 coaches fired because of allegations, and had never finished higher than 9th in the conference. It was going to take an absolute miracle to turn the program around, but there was one man who saw potential in Lawrence and was the right guy for the job, and this is where the rise begins, and that coach is Lance Leipold. In order for Kansas football to succeed, they would need a coach who could develop a program, could change the culture, and could take it literally one day at a time. As I said, there was no better man for the job than Lance Leipold. Leipold went to Wisconsin Whitewater as quarterback and then quickly went into coaching. In 1987, he became the quarterback's coach for the team and then went on to become a graduate assistant at Wisconsin from 1991 to 1993. He must have learned a lot there as he quickly rose up the ranks, becoming an assistant at Nebraska before taking the head coaching job at Whitewater in 2007. You probably know the name Wisconsin Whitewater because of him. He became the head coach there in 2007, and he did nothing but win. In 8 years there, the team went 109-6. They also had a 53-3 conference record, and they won 6 national championships, appearing in them 7 out of 8 years. Leipold is one of the best coaches in Division III football history, and built that team into a dynasty. That is why Buffalo decided to hire him in 2015. They wanted to see if he could translate his D3 success to Division I, and it actually happened. After having 2 straight losing seasons in 2015 and 2016, he'd get them to a 6-6 record in 2017. In 2018, the Bulls would go 10-4 with a 7-1 record in the conference. They lost in the Dollar General Bowl, and then in 2019, they'd once again go to a bowl game after an 8-5 record. In 2020, the team went 6-1 with a 5-0 conference record, where they won the Camellia Bowl and got ranked number 25. He had found a star running back in Jarrett Patterson and had brought Buffalo back to some sort of success. They became one of the better MAC schools, and Leipold was starting to become a bigger name on the coaching market. He had now taken 2 bad programs and developed them into winners. But he would have his ultimate test as could he do it at Kansas. After the firing of Les Miles, they would bring in Leipold, and he said his plan was to move his family to Lawrence and be there for a long time. Some people laughed at him when he said it, but I truly do know he meant that. They first had a quarterback battle. They had brought in a transfer by the name of Jason Bean, and then they returned Jalen Daniels. Bean would become the starter for the first few games, and led them to the first win of the Leipold era against South Dakota, as they won 17-14 and rushed the field. It was obviously a great win for Kansas, but they had a long way to go. They would lose a ton of games in a row. They get blown out by Coastal, Baylor, Duke, Iowa State, and Texas Tech before a huge momentum-changing game against Oklahoma. The number 3 Sooners came to town, and in that game, Kansas was competitive, took the lead, and they allowed fans to come in after halftime. Unfortunately, Caleb Williams made a big-time play, and it was enough for Oklahoma to escape, but this showed that Kansas was no longer a pushover, and somehow they could compete with the best team in the Big 12. The following week, they'd fall off against Kansas State, but then they go on the road to Texas. They were in this game the entire time, but after a late touchdown, Leipold decided to roll the dice and go for 2. There was absolutely nothing to lose at this point, and they had the momentum. Jalen Daniels would find a walk-on fullback for the touchdown, and they would win 57-56. Jared Casey became a legend overnight. The Longhorns became a laughingstock, and this was the first Big 12 win of the Leipold era. To finish the year, they lose back-to-back one-possession games against TCU and West Virginia, and this was the start of the Jalen Daniels hype. Daniels would finish the season with 860 yards passing and 7 touchdowns, and then 3 more scores on the ground. Unfortunately, he burned his red shirt in the process, but it looks like that experience has gone a long way in 2022. Expectations are never high for Kansas, as they were picked to finish 10th in the Big 12, and while some thought they could improve, I don't think anyone could have expected what has happened now. In their first game against Tennessee Tech, they'd win 56-10, and in that game, Jalen Daniels would play well, and Devin Neal broke out at running back. In week 2, they'd have their first Big 12 test, as they'd have to go on the road and play West Virginia. Pretty much everyone picked the Mountaineers to win this game, but this is when Kansas showed they were legit. Jalen Daniels would combine for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, and after going to overtime, they would score and then have a pick 6, and they would win. This was embarrassing for West Virginia, but huge for Kansas. The hype was really starting to take off for them now, but it would reach hysteria after they would go on the road and beat Houston 48-30. The craziest part is the game was never in doubt. Jalen Daniels combined for 300 yards and 5 touchdowns as they would go on the road to a Houston team that started out the season ranked. They dominated start to finish, and now some were starting to wonder, is Kansas football actually decent? Well, in a battle of basketball schools, we get a chance to find out. Under first-year head coach Mike Elko, Duke was 3-0 and would now travel to Lawrence for that game. The Jayhawks had their first sellout in years, and they put on a show. Jalen Daniels once again showcased why he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country, as he went 19 of 23 for 324 yards and 4 touchdowns, with also nearly 100 yards on the ground and a score there. They had a ton of highlight level plays, got out to a dominating start, and eventually won 35-27 after falling apart late. The Jayhawks are now 4-0 and have games against Iowa State and TCU coming up. Both of those games are at home, and as of right now, I would actually pick the Jayhawks to win both of them. They've now beat 3 Power 5 schools, and there's no reason why they can't continue that momentum. Jalen Daniels is off to a historic start as he has 890 yards passing with 11 touchdowns and 1 interception. He also has 320 yards rushing with 4 touchdowns, and going into this weekend, he had the best QBR in the country and is right now a dark horse Heisman contender. If the Jayhawks can somehow win their next 2 games, they'll have a huge road matchup with Oklahoma. That would be insane. The thing is, Kansas's offense has been dominant, their defense has been great, they've all bought into the culture, and they're winning games they were not supposed to win. Kansas right now is America's team, and I'm super pumped to see what's going to happen to them. It's an absolute crime that they are not ranked right now, as with the recent AP poll dropping, the Jayhawks were left out, and for some reason, people think Pitt deserves it more than Kansas. It's unfortunate to see the disrespect that Kansas has got, but I know they're going to prove it and get into that top 25 poll soon and continue to prove everyone wrong. It's really exciting to see what has happened to this program. I love Coach Leipold, and the sky is the limit for Kansas with him. But what do you think? If you're a Kansas football fan, what do you think of this year's team? How did you get to this point, and what are your thoughts moving forward? If you're a fan of another school, what do you think of the Kansas hype? What team or storyline should I cover in my next video? And before you go, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.